Crooked River, Chapter 41. Rain and hail came down on our backs as if to pound us to pieces, and the claps of thunder shook the earth so hard I thought the world had surely come to an end. Me and Mercy lay in the field like two flat stones. I prayed to God and Ma to save us. There wasn't a thing we could do but lie in the mud and pray. When the thunder finally moved off and the rain stopped, I didn't know at first if we were dead or alive. I wiped my eyes and lifted up my head. What I saw made me gasp. The cornfield was gone. Nothing but mud and water surrounded us, with bits of green scattered here and there like straggles of yarn. Pa's corn was gone. The weight of that sight took away all my breath. It was as if the storm had finished what I had started with, my own foolish hands. Only it had done far worse. I had just wanted to hurt my Pa and the boys, but the storm had taken away every growing thing. Next to me, Mercy clung to my arm and cried to go home. "I'm scared, Reb, I'm scared." She wept over and over, "Take me back, take me back." In her bedraggled clothes, she looked small and helpless, like a tiny bird. And for the first time in my whole life, I had the peculiar, soft feeling of being a Ma, as if I was the Ma bird who was supposed to be looking out for her. "Hush," I said, wiping her hair back from her face. "We're going on back to the house. Ain't nothing to worry about." Now I hadn't carried Mercy since she was a toddling baby, but I picked her up after that and carried her all the way to the cabin, where her tiny wet arms holding tight to my neck. The house was in a ruined state. When we got there, the fire on the hearth was out, and all the wood was soaked. Water had come down the sides of the chimney and run across the floor. Some of the shingles on the roof were gone, and one tree had toppled into the dooryard. After all that had happened to us, I couldn't find the strength to move 1 foot more after we got back. I took off Mercy's clothes and wrapped her in a quilt, and then I sat in a chair by the cold hearth, not even bothering with my own rain-soaked dress. Outside the house, everything seemed strangely silent. I thought about what Peter Kelly had said, how he waved his arm at the sky and told us Indian John believed the thunder would save him. Inside me, a terrible fear began to grow, a fear that perhaps the storm had swept away everyone in their settlement and spared only Mercy and me. Heart-pounding, I listened hard for the sound of Laura or the boys coming back. A hawk screeched above the trees. A wasp began to hum and peck at the window. And then, when the eerie silence seemed as if it would never end, I heard the sound of someone coming down the road. I jumped up. "Rebecca!" a familiar voice called out. "Reb! Mercy, are you there?" It was Laura, running without her bonnet and as soaked to the bone as me. When she reached where I stood in the dooryard, she pulled me tight and against her big shoulder. "It was just so awful. I was just so awful afraid of losing you and Mercy," she cried, her whole self shaking with sobs. "It just tore my heart to pieces standing inside the store knowing you and Mercy were by yourselves in the storm. I didn't know what I'd find when I got here. I didn't know what terrible sight I'd find." It was hard to keep my voice steady to tell her that me and Mercy were fine. We had been caught in the storm, I said, but we were both fine. Laura wiped her eyes and glanced at the cabin. "And Mercy's inside?" I nodded. The question I wanted to ask and didn't want to ask seemed to hang in the air between us. I didn't want to grieve Laura more by asking it, and I think perhaps she didn't want to cause me grief by answering it. So neither one of us spoke. We just stood there in the dooryard for a long while, taking account of all that the storm had done around us. But the question would not keep silent. "I want to know," I hesitated, and my voice stuck in my throat. I looked up at the sky and took a deep breath. "I want to know what happened to Indian John." "Reb," Laura began, I pressed my lips together stubbornly. "I want to know." Laura sighed and gave me a sorrowful look. "I'll tell you what I saw," she said, finally shaking her head. "May God forgive me, but I'll tell you what I saw." Laura said that Indian John was taken to the gallows near Mr. Perry's store. Some of the men who brought him there gave speeches, and then the Reverend offered a short sermon and 2 prayers. He spoke some kind of things about the Indians, Reb. "Some kind things about the Indians, Reb," she said. "Real kind things." All the while, Indian John stood on the gallows with the hanging rope around his neck. It was nearly an hour, she told me, before the order for execution was given. I had to look away. My stomach was so sick, Reb. Laura's voice shook. How could they do that to a poor man? How could they? I swallowed hard. His body crumpled to the ground, Reb, Laura said, closing her eyes. The hanging rope broke above him. My eyes flashed toward Laura. The rope broke? I turned and saw his body on the ground as the storm fell upon our heads, Laura answered quietly. May God save the poor man's soul. That's what I prayed as we ran for the shelter of Mr. Perry's store. The whole crowd ran. I thought we would all be swept away in the storm. I had hold of Lorenzo's hand in the scattering crowd, and we ran toward the store, with the wind and thunder roaring around us, as I have never heard before in all my life. I was silent, picking at the cloth of my skirt with my fingers. So he is dead? I said softly. They have buried his body and he is dead? No, Laura answered in trembling voice. That is what has unsettled everyone, all of us who were there. Laura turned and stared at me. I saw his body on the ground with my own eyes, Rebecca. Truly I did. And Pa said when the storm hit, he lifted the body into the coffin with the help of the sheriff and 4 other men. And Dr. Weston said that all life had expired. But when the storm ended and the men returned to the gallows, the body was missing from the coffin, and no one knows where it has gone. No one knows where it has gone. I am a running deer. I am a soaring bird. I am a diving fish. I am a rippling snake. Woods, sky, water, day, night, day, I run.